Lost in the dusty, dog-eared pages of American criminal history. Join us as we relive another gruesome, grisly, gripping tale of murder, mischief, and mayhem. Created and written by Justin Vior. This series is an anthology of turn-of-the-century banner headline cases before the days of high-tech forensic criminology. America's chilling, appalling, yet intriguing heritage of murder. Tonight's episode, Young Skeegie, Old Sparky, and J. Edgar, Episode 4.
When last we saw Frank McCall, he had painted himself into a corner over the increasingly convoluted story he had concocted while being interrogated by the feds and Sheriff Coleman. Let's pick up the story there.
Frank, this is Special Agent Rutson in charge of the case.
We've recovered the money, Mr. McCall. Thank you for that much. My team found it right where you said it'd be. Per your allegations, we've interviewed Mr. Edgar Cash. He's not telling us where the boy is. Frank, at this point, after all this time has passed, we think the boy might be dead. If you were involved with Edgar Cash in this plot, a scheme that he masterminded, we need you to help us find that boy, or the body.
Well, only he'd know that.
Mr. McCall, I want you to meet someone. This is Mr. J. Edgar Hoover, Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Washington, D.C. Mr. Hoover, Franklin Pierce McCall.
Gentlemen, I've asked to be present for this part of your interrogation, Mr. McCall, because these next few minutes will help us close this case, wrap up the Bureau's activities in the matter, and let the judicial process proceed. You must already know you're in some serious trouble, young man, even for just taking part in a kidnapping plot, even if it was the boy's uncle or some other person who hatched the plot and manipulated you. I've watched your interrogation, son. I can see you're no fool. Perhaps you were just duped by this other fellow, but the important thing now is that boy. Finding that boy. Even if he's dead now, which I think is highly likely, we need you to tell us where he is.
I told your fellas here, Mr. Hoover. I just don't know.
You must know something. Mr. Cash, if he hatched this scheme, coordinated things with you closely. He obviously had a plan. He spoke with you of the particulars, his actions, his movements.
He didn't tell me what happened with Skeegie. I'm telling you honestly, sir, I don't know where he is.
You know something, McCall. You have some sense, some information. If not exactly where the body is, then at least an idea of the vicinity. There's only one way to help yourself now and get yourself in my good graces, and not have the full weight of the Bureau and my investigators come down on you, pin the entire kidnap plot on you, and see to it that you fry.
Mr. Hoover, I was framed. I don't know where Skeegie is.
Tell me what you know. Speak.
I may have a feeling where Asbury put him. He said some things. I have an idea.
That's much better, Mr. McCall. Now you're being smart. Fine, I'll arrange an outing back down to the Princeton area after dark. You'll be escorted by a team of my top agents. Your good faith in this will only help your cause, sir. But I'm warning you, jerk us around. Waste any more of my precious time, and I will go after your wife in Princeton, your family and mother up in Jasper, anyone and everyone personally connected with you. I'll have them prosecuted as conspirators and imprisoned. And if you lie to me, boy, I will personally strap you in that chair and pull that electric switch.
J. Edgar Hoover could play hardball. A dozen FBI agents, along with Hoover, Sheriff Coleman, and a coroner, made the trip from Miami down to Princeton, keeping the excursion under wraps from public and press. Hoover didn't want the publicity that would come from a wild goose chase. Around 10 p.m., the feds and their boss found themselves swatting mosquitoes in the darkness as they tramped through brambles and thickets, flashlights in hand. Franklin Pierce McCall was sticking to his story, and agents were still playing along.
Mr. McCall, you said this area was your best guess for the search?
Yeah, from what Asbury Cash let slip to me. That little feller might be somewhere around here.
Let's make this quick, Mr. McCall. I don't care much for mosquito bites.
But there was something else in the humid South Florida night air.
Agent Rutson, I feel the boy is close by. You smell it on the breeze? What, Sheriff? Something decaying. It's the smell of death.
Agent Rutson, I found something.
In a palmetto thicket, underneath a twisted, evergreen pine tree,
Lord God. Hey, get the lights over here, fellas.
they'd found Skeegie, still in his pajamas, badly decomposed after 12 days on open ground, exposed to the harsh South Florida weather.
We found him, Mr. Hoover. We found him. Mr. Hoover, get a body bag over here, someone.
As gently as they could, agents pulled the corpse out of the dense thicket and laid it on a sheet, which they carried over to the road, past the bureau director and Franklin McCall.
I never thought Asbury would kill his own nephew.
Shut up, McCall! Miserable son of a bitch. Agent, put him back in the car!
Bailey and Vera Cash held private funeral services for their beloved son. The whole town would have turned out otherwise. The boy was buried quietly at Graceland Memorial Park Cemetery in Miami. His 4 young cousins, the children of Asbury Cash, were pallbearers. FBI Director Hoover didn't stick around for the funeral services. He left out of Wilcox Airfield in Miami after taking full advantage of a photo opportunity with the press that had followed developments in the case.
Mr. Hoover, how did your agents crack the Skeegie Cash case?
Did you personally interrogate Frank McCall?
Will you testify at his trial?
Did the Dade County Sheriff's Department contribute to solving it?
Members of the press, as sad and tragic as this case is due to the ultimate fate of the little boy, we can record the matter as another success for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Another example of the vital importance of the skilled, professional, and unsurpassed detective work on the part of our agents. We're always happy to lend that expertise to local law enforcement jurisdictions around this great nation as they grapple with such heinous and, but for the Bureau, intricate and otherwise unsolvable crimes. And mark my words, gentlemen, if the criminal element in our country, read the papers, has followed developments in the Cash boys' kidnapping, now solved, realizes the certainty of their ultimate apprehension when up against the experienced and incorruptible law enforcement officials of the FBI, I can confidently predict that this will be the last kidnapping ever in America. And you may quote me on that. Pose for a photo? Certainly. Then I have a plane to catch. Thank you all for coming.
Hoover wasn't a man inclined to share credit on a newsworthy case, even when, in truth, so little of the credit belonged to him and his bureau. But local folks knew the part their sheriff, D.C. Coleman, played in cracking the Skeegie Cash kidnapping. And Coleman himself, not the publicity hound that Hoover was, seemed satisfied. Frank McCall must have thought he could lessen his guilt in the eyes of the law by implicating a fellow conspirator and claiming the other fellow committed the crime. It wasn't to be. Like many other states, Florida had enacted the felony murder rule. If death occurs, even accidentally, during a felony crime, all parties are equally guilty. It wasn't long thereafter that McCall finally came clean about the Skeegie Cash kidnapping and his role in the Slipshot affair, admitting it was a one-man operation. He acted alone. In a confession letter to authorities, he gave the following account.
Ever since we were married, my wife did without things she should have had. I thought of everything I could to get money. I was desperate. The idea popped into my mind to kidnap somebody, someone with some money. And then I thought of Bailey Cash's son. On the night of May 28th, I walked to the rear door of the Cash home. The screen door was locked, so I cut it with my knife. Crept down the hallway to the bedroom, saw the crib in the dark. I picked up Skeegie in my right arm and placed the handkerchiefs over his mouth and eyes. I didn't know I covered the nose. Went back out the door with him, through the brush, through the woods to my home. 15 minutes. He didn't make a sound the whole way. I thought he was asleep. I got him in the house and tried to wake him. I shook him, called his name, but he didn't answer. I tried a damp cloth on his face, but I knew he was dead. I didn't know what to do. I picked him up, went out the back door, running, half a mile maybe till I come to a road, a thicket of palmetto scrub under a crooked evergreen pine. I left him there in the dark. Got back home, wrote the first note with the ransom instructions, left it on the door of that shack in the Negro section of town. I yelled inside at the man to get up and deliver it, but he didn't. I wrote the second note, left it on Asbury Cash's door for him or his wife to find, saying, go to the shack, find the first note. Monday night, there were too many people around for the ransom drop. Someone could have seen. Wrote the third note, got Harry Wright to open the pump at Sinclair Station for me. Said I found the note there. Later, I went home, then out to the orange grove off Sunset Drive. Saw Bailey's car coming, flashed the light, and when he made the drop, I picked up the money. Never got to spend any but $5 of it.
This court is in session. The state of Florida versus Franklin Pierce McCall, here in charge of the crime of kidnapping, a felony, and the crime of murder, felony, resultant of said kidnapping. Judge Atkinson presiding.
Justice came swiftly. McCall was indicted by a grand jury. The trial commenced on June 15th, a week after Skeegie Cash's body was recovered, and 18 days after the kidnapping. The only difficulty in the matter seemed to be finding a defense attorney to represent the admitted kidnapper and murderer. McCall pled guilty to the former charge. A coroner testified as to the deplorable condition of the body. It had an impact. Courtroom listeners were horrified. McCall testified for the defense, saying the boy's death was an accident. He hadn't meant for him to die. Knowing this was tantamount to a guilty plea, the prosecutor on the case didn't push it. In all, the trial took a brisk 2 days, and in the Dade County Courthouse, more than 200 citizens and members of the press packed a courtroom that held only 150. They came to hear Judge Atkinson pronounce verdict and sentence.
In nearly 40 years on the judicial bench of this state, this is the most cold-blooded thing I ever heard of. To perpetuate this unspeakable act upon a little boy, on his family, an entire community. And astoundingly, I've yet to see or hear any remorse expressed for these outrageous, unconscionable actions. But it is now past the time for regrets. It was too late the moment that boy died in your thieving arms, Mr. McCall. This court directs the sheriff of Dade County to transport the defendant, now adjudged guilty of the crimes of kidnapping and murder, to be held at Raiford Prison in Bradford County, where the governor of this state will set the time and date of his execution.
An officer placed handcuffs on the convicted man. A cool and calm Frank McCall turned to his defense attorney.
I guess I'll get what's coming to me.
Rayford Prison was selected because it was one of the few in the state with death row facilities with a lethal piece of furniture there, an electric chair aptly, if not affectionately, known as Old Sparky. Back in Princeton, Joseph Hilliard was quick to denounce and disown his murderous son-in-law. But McCall's wife Claudine and his mother Lily stuck by him. They claimed he'd been railroaded by police into a false confession, even though he wrote that confession himself and pled guilty in court. Mother and wife McCall hired attorney C.A. Avriette from McCall's hometown of Jasper, Florida, to appeal the conviction. He was pretty much the only attorney in the state who would consider taking the case.
Mrs. McCall and Mrs. McCall, I'll accept your husband's, your son's, appeal case, but please, let's drop this pretense that your husband, your son, is an innocent and wrongly convicted man. He's guilty. He knows he's guilty. He received a fair trial. The legal point on which this appeal will rest, and I believe it can succeed, is the death sentence. We can attack that in the appeals court, and I believe we can save your husband's, your son's, life.
There was one other avenue for saving the miserable young life of Frank McCall, the Florida Pardons Board. The governor arranged a meeting between Vera Cash, mother of the murdered boy, and Lily McCall, the mother of the 20-year-old convicted killer. Mother walked up to Mother in an anteroom of the governor's office, where they spoke and wept together.
Mrs. Cash, I know I have no earthly right to ask this of you, but I ask as a mother. Your mother, too. I'm sorry, unspeakably sorry for what my boy did to your boy. It was wrong. On earth and heaven, it was wrong. It was an accident. He's young, foolish. He's not a bad boy. Please, Mrs. Cash, spare the life of my son. Please.
Mrs. McCall, I understand what it is to be a mother, as do you. Feeling my own pain, I don't wish to add to the heartache of another, but on heaven and earth, This is the truth of it. Your son has not only killed my son, he has, in a very real sense, killed my husband and myself. No penalty imposed upon him can repay us for the crime or relieve us of the misery. No, I won't save your son.
At a hearing before the Pardons Board, commutation of McCall's sentence was opposed by State Attorney General G.A. Worley, the Florida Bar Association, and by Mr. and Mrs. Bailey Cash. One editor wrote on his newspaper's editorial page,
"Like all murderers, Frank McCall holds life cheaply until his own life is at stake. Then, life becomes dear to him, something to be cherished. To grant clemency to this kidnap slayer would be a mockery of justice and would invite other criminals to perpetrate similar crimes."
On July 11th, Attorney Avriette filed a writ of error with the Dade County Circuit Court, halting the execution of Franklin Pierce McCall. Avriette described his client as an amateur criminal undeserving of the ultimate punishment, who should pay his debt to society through a life behind bars. The attorney called for a new trial. The Dade County Circuit Court denied the petition. The Florida Supreme Court, citing McCall's waiving of his right to a jury trial, also denied it. The U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans declined to become involved, as did two of the most liberal justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. McCall's appeals and his time had run out. Journalists, looking for the makings of a good headline, tracked down Bailey Cash and goaded him.
Mr. Cash, what are your feelings now that Franklin McCall has been sentenced to die for the kidnapping and murder of your son? Word has it your wife refused his mother's plea for McCall's life. What do you say?
I say, anything less than the maximum penalty for him will be unsatisfactory to me and my family. And that's all I'll say.
Prisoner Franklin McCall, you have 90 minutes.
Frank McCall donned his best gray suit for his appointment with old Sparky on the final day of his earthly life. His brother, Bird McCall, and his preacher uncle, A.C. McCall, had prayed with him the day prior. A few weeks earlier, McCall penned a letter to his mother, Linnie.
I'm so sorry, dear mother, for causing you the pain I have. If there was only some way to take it back. I have confessed my sins and believe I have been forgiven. I did not mean for it to be as it was. I don't know anything else to write except to tell you that I'll meet you again someday. Your baby boy, Franklin.
A son sorry for what he'd put his poor mother through. But no mention of apology or regret was ever uttered for the parents of Skeegie Cash or their innocent 5-year-old son.
Prisoner McCall, prepare yourself.
Sheriff Coleman from Dade County was on hand. He personally went to the condemned man's cell as an escort.
Franklin, it's time.
Sheriff Coleman, I'm actually glad it's you who come for me. I want you to know I understand your position in this whole business. Just doing your job. You did a number on me, got me good. No hard feelings.
Thank you, son. It's time.
Handcuffed and shackled, Frank McCall, escorted by Sheriff Coleman and the Raiford prison chaplain, left the condemned man's cell and took a short walk.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
The last walk that Frank McCall, less than 3 months into his 22nd year of life, would ever take.
And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
Once in the chair, in a quavering voice, he tried mightily to keep steady. The condemned man read a statement to the grim gathering.
Mark my word. The word of a man who will be dead in a few short minutes. I have repeatedly asked to be taken before any court or judge or jury, be injected with truth serum, be given lie detector tests, have my fingerprints compared with any found at the crime scene, any examination to determine guilt or innocence. All this has been denied me. Okay, I'm ready.
The words of a liar, a coward. The last words that Franklin Pierce McCall would ever speak, true to his character, cold and self-serving to the end. He was declared dead at 11:16, the morning of June 24th, 1939. Up in Washington, J. Edgar Hoover got the publicity he sought and, from Congress, the appropriations money he needed to reopen his shuttered field offices around the country. The press made him into a national hero. Back in Florida, McCall's mother Lily claimed her son's body and brought him home to their town of Jasper in the Florida Panhandle, where he was buried in the family plot at Evergreen Cemetery. Evergreen, the crooked tree under which the body of young James Bailey Skeegie Cash Jr. laid for 10 days in a rude tangle of spiked palmetto plants beneath the Florida sun. And so concludes another tragic tale of murder, mischief, and mayhem. Until next time.
Murder, Mischief, and Mayhem is an anthology of our rich American heritage of scandal, mystery, and murder, revived from the faded pages of history. You can find Murder, Mischief, and Mayhem wherever you listen to your podcasts. Created and written by Justin Vior. Narrated by Kevin Silva. Produced by Ed Adler and Ken Yaz. Direction and casting by David Rosenthal. Sound design and music score by Ray Soldick. Script supervision by Stephen Glennon and Maria Norris. This podcast is dedicated to the memory and inspiration of Dr. W. Keith Krause. Murder, Mischief, and Mayhem is the property and production of Ed and Ken's Excellent Adventure, LLC. All rights reserved.